Our next speaker is coming from the United States. As a matter of fact, between US and Bosnia, he had Greece, his schedule. He offered to come here to see and learn about this phenomenon. And I'm very happy to greet a man of many skills, of a lot of knowledge. He's like walking encyclopedia. Dr. LaViolette.
It's been a real exciting week, and it's really been astounding seeing the pyramids and what they do. And I'm hoping I can add something to understand, for example, how they became covered and what was going on at that time during the Ice Age. This is my website, one of them. Let's see. Okay. So here we have the Pyramid of the Sun. We're looking, as I understand, this is the north face. And on the north face, east and west faces, the soil that's covering it is maybe 1 meter deep and gets less deep as you go up. But on the south side, it's much deeper. Sam told me that it's up to 10 meters or more there. So this would indicate, well, my theory is that this was buried by waves of water coming from the glacial ice sheet, which would have been to the north. And the fact that the sediments are deeper on the south is exactly what you'd expect for a wave coming from the north, because the south is sheltered, so sediment tends to collect there. Now, for sediment to go this high to the top of the pyramid and tops of these hills here, we're talking about huge waves, biblical proportions. And all that there's mist from all over the world to tell of the flood. Geologists may have trouble believing this because they don't really have, in the past, haven't had a model to explain how these waves would be generated. And for my PhD work, I studied the Ice Age period, and one of the things I was working on was the flood. And I will explain this mechanism. Now, the period, here we have some dates that have been done on the pyramid for dating radiocarbon dates. They say that the sediment generally is at least 15,000 years old. This is from the State Institute for Agropedology. But actual radiocarbon dates that they've done here in the Institute have here 24,800 carbon-14 years and 29,200 carbon-14 years. And to get to calendar years, you have to add some thousands of years because the carbon-14 scale always gives younger dates, and they calibrate to see how much to add. So we're actually talking, if you go to the higher one here, we get up to around 34,000 years old. And let's take that as the age of the pyramid. This was, as I understand, a pretty good date. It was found under a block, so from a leaf, I believe. So it seems that may have gotten there when they were building the pyramid. So we'll go back to this time, what was happening at that time. First of all, the trees were all different from what you see. We have currently deciduous trees, but back then I looked up to see what it would be like. It was a lot of spruce. I think this may be spruce. I clipped it from the bush in front. Scotch pine, fir, Swiss pine. You also had some birch and grasslands. So trees that you see further north. The temperatures were perhaps 10 degrees centigrade cooler during the Ice Age. Trees like maple, elm, oak, birch, and poplar were very few, and this is probably most of the trees you see during these times. This is a graph that goes back 60,000 years. It shows radiocarbon excess. What this means is they chart what you would expect the radiocarbon to be, the radiocarbon dates. And if they deviate a large amount from the calendar dates, they say, well, there's excess radiocarbon. It makes it seem younger. But that's actually a measure of solar activity, because the more radiocarbon in the atmosphere, how it gets there is through solar cosmic rays hitting the atmosphere. So times when there was a great excess, like here, look at this. This was a 6,000 year period where radiocarbon was going up. It's the biggest increase we've had, and well, there was a very large one here, 58,000. But in the last 50,000 years, this was the biggest. And I'll show you a graph in a moment. It shows beryllium-10 went way up, huge peak, biggest one in 50,000 years. Beryllium-10 is produced in the atmosphere from cosmic rays, galactic cosmic rays. So this indicates something was going on from the galaxy, a big cosmic ray event, and the sun. The sun was extremely active. We're talking about much more active than today. If we go back, to give you a comparison, go back to this little peak here. You see this. This is about 13,000 years ago. This is about a 200-year rise of radiocarbon due to solar activity. During this period, the sun was about 50 times more active than today. And we had a mass extinction at that time. All the large animals in North America, Pleistocene animals, became extinct, leaving only small animals. And here in Europe, you also had a lot of mammoths that became extinct. So, by comparison, this was much bigger event. Now here we are with a pyramid about 34,000 years. So this event had already occurred. By the way, Neanderthal man became extinct here. And this is with the latest data. The last few years, they finally said, yes, it was a definite extinction, that he didn't survive past here. I had said years back, about 2007, that if Neanderthal man had become extinct around this time, it was most likely this event that did it. And at that time, they still had dates as far forward as here, so they weren't quite sure where it was. Now they pretty much nailed it that it's right here. And that makes sense, because the levels of solar cosmic rays from the active sun on your surface would have been lethal. And one possible function of a pyramid and tunnels would be to get away from the radiation. So this could have had a very practical aspect in that sense, besides all the other things, the healing aspect, and so on. These arrows indicate times of rise of carbon-14, so you expect increased solar activity at these times. Also, I'd like to mention that this scale is very accurate in terms of time. Tree ring scales go back to about 13,000 years ago, so we go back about this far, tree ring scales. this is from the Cariaco Basin. They count the barbs in the sediment. This is an ocean sediment core. And as the seasons change, it makes a different color in the core. So they're able to count the years back. So it's almost as accurate as tree rings. And so this pretty much, this Cariaco Basin record is the most accurate chronology that we have going back this far. Some NASA scientists did a study of tracks on Apollo spacecraft windows. They looked at pits and they counted solar flare tracks in the pits. And they concluded that the solar flare rate was much higher in the past. They could actually make a record going back because there would be craters due to micrometeorites hitting the window, and then on top would be another crater and another crater. So they knew which craters came first and which later. They were able to get this record going back in time. And you see that about 15,000, 16,000 years ago, the solar flare track production rate with solar activity was about 50 times higher than it is today. And it came way down. So here we have the end of the ice age about here. So there was some big event, and this could be even pushed this way a little bit. This scale is not that accurate by counting how you date the craters varies. Covering up something there. Anyway, I think what I was trying to say there, got covered up, is that we're looking just at this recent event during the period when we had that mass extinction. But actually, you had other events like this. It's just the cratering, we're looking at the most recent solar activity event. But the sun is something that gets very aggravated at times. And the question is what aggravates it, and how to get to that. So this is a map of the ice sheets covering the Earth during the Ice Age. You see here the North American ice sheet was the biggest. And here you have the European ice sheet. And this is the polar cap. Here's the Antarctic ice sheet, much bigger than today. You have a little in Australia, South America. So here Bosnia is right around here. I'm guessing it was about 500 kilometers from the edge of the ice sheet, so it was pretty close. Now, what happens when you have ice and suddenly the sun gets more active and starts sending coronal mass ejections? Have you heard of the term coronal mass ejection? And another term they use is solar proton event. The solar proton event is when the cosmic rays come very quickly from the sun. They can come in a matter of hours, or even less than an hour will be here. The coronal mass ejection is actually a ball of plasma that travels. It can take days to get there. If you have a real big solar event, it can actually defeat the Earth's magnetic field. And actually, this event here, at 40,000, 41,000 years ago, you had a geomagnetic reversal. The Earth's magnetic poles actually reversed for 400 years. So that shows you how major was that event. We had a geomagnetic excursion, which means that the geomagnetic pole went towards the equator around 14,000 years ago, but not a reversal. So this was a really big event too. So when you have a heating of the ice sheet, there were times where the climate, even during the ice age, warmed up tremendously. You would have gotten melting of the ice, and it would have formed lakes on the surface of the ice sheet. And not only at the edge of the ocean, you've gotten meltwater collecting big lakes at the edge of the ocean, but also at high altitude. This ice sheet is up to 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers high in the middle. So imagine what would happen if a dam that was holding this water broke somewhere in the middle of the ice sheet, and this water started pouring down, getting more and more momentum. And then it hits other lakes on the surface and triggers them. You get a domino effect. And by the time this wave gets to the edge of the ice sheet, it's perhaps half a kilometer high, maybe going 200, 300 kilometers per hour. And it could be maybe 500 kilometers long, maybe 1,000, we don't know. Because as it comes down, it spreads out. And then once it hits there's water at the edge of the ice sheet, it can completely jettison the lake, and that would add more water. And this will keep going as what I call this a continental glacier wave. It can sweep across 1,000 kilometers of the continent, even go into the ocean. And at this time you had ice covering a lot of the ocean, so the wave could actually skitter over the ice and end up going very far out into the ocean and dropping material, sediment from the mountains regions, from more continental regions. And this explains what are called Heinrich events. Heinrich, named after Heinrich, he found debris from continental regions in the middle of the ocean and couldn't figure out how it got there, because usually you expect calcium carbonate from shells. And here we're certain bands. Suddenly you got this rock-type material deposited. And he was thinking, well, maybe you had icebergs floating there and somehow they melted and reflected. But one fellow said, yes, but this material was deposited very quickly. So quickly it actually crushed the sea life under it. And I'll show you in a minute some graph that shows when these occurred. These are examples of floods, gigantic floods from the ice sheet. So here is a picture of coronal mass ejection. I guess I have to press it again.
Same button.
Same button.
Whenever you're pressing, don't press again.
So I press on the computer. It's a movie. The one I wanted to show is a movie of the coronal mass ejection. There, that's it. That's the movie. We have to do it manually. It's coming now. I think it's coming. Oh, okay, so we can see. I'll just tell you what it was. It's a picture of plasma breaking away from the sun, coming out all the way and hitting the earth, and it energizes the magnetic, it gets hot in the magnetic field of the earth, and these particles cause aurora displays. In fact, some people at Los Alamos, Barat and his group, they found that the pictures that they draw, the petroglyphs, they're drawing on rock. Some of these stick figures, they believe, represent pictures of auroral displays in ancient times, indicating that the sun was more active. People were seeing these, and they were generally as if they were painting what they were seeing towards the pole regions. So, when this event arrives, animals have been exposed to very high levels of radiation. And for example, I did a study of the one that happened 12,900 years ago, which was recorded in the ice core. You see huge ionization spike, because this would have ionized the atmosphere when it occurred, and a lot of other things going on there. And from the calculation of the magnitude of there's also, we've got a carbon-14 rise, which I'll show in a minute. For the magnitude of the carbon-14 increase, you conclude that this must have been at least 100 times bigger than what we have today. So far bigger than the Carrington event. In fact, it was so big, it could have defeated the Earth's magnetic field temporarily and allowed a coronal mass ejection then to actually contact the atmosphere and produce a cascade of particles, electron cascade, that when it reached the Earth's surface, trees could actually turn black. The bark would have been carbonized. In fact, even the trunks carbonized. And in fact, I did some studies of mines in Greece where you find lignite. Carbonized material has been shredded up and deposited. So this event, coronal mass ejection event, conflagration, would occur immediately before a flood event, because then once everything is heated up, it produces a flood, and it would actually grind up trees, carbonized trees, as lignite would deposit it in any valleys, along with bones of animals. In Siberia, we find the parts of the animals are preserved because of the cold temperatures. The tundra preserves the parts from decaying. So you have not only the bones, the tusks of the animals, but also entire carcasses. And they find ice mixed in with the bones and the sediment. And this is exactly what you'd expect from a wave coming down the ice sheet. Because it would have ice mixed with the cold water. So this would have overtaken animals by surprise. In fact, in Alaska, they found mammoths that were eating daisies or whatever. It was in their stomach. And so it happened so quickly while they were eating. It was probably in the spring or summer when it occurred. And probably the cosmic rays from the sun help preserve them from decaying. So it's sort of like instant pasteurization. They caught out. And the large animals, like mastodons, they didn't have any place to hide. The small animals would sense this and it would go into the holes. And by the way, I think we all have the ability to sense cosmic radiation. It would produce flashes of light. Then you would start seeing flashes of light. Could be bluish or white. Astronauts reported this up in space, this phenomenon. They found it correlated with cosmic ray events. And actually, I experienced some the other day, a few weeks back, and I thought it was unusual. And also about the same time, the TV flickered, and sort of like as if a cosmic ray had gone through it. So I thought, well, I better report this on one of my news postings, because we're very carefully watching the galactic center now for an outburst, because there's what's called the G2 cloud that's coming in, and we're concerned whether some material might get ripped off and engulfed by the galactic core and produce galactic core explosion. So I thought it best to report this, and I said, I don't know if this means anything, but this is what I experienced. And all sorts of people wrote back that they had similar experiences, not just at that time, other times. And so it seems like fairly, a lot of people have this experience. Maybe the people here have had it. And also, it was found that the cosmic ray, there's something like 8 out of the 20 cosmic ray detectors went offline about that time that I had seen the flicker on the TV. A lot of them in the polar regions. So it seems like something might have really happened at that time. But not to worry right now. I mean, everything's okay, but you never know. These things can take you by surprise. So here's what a glacier would look like as it comes down the ice sheet. It gathers energy and really takes off. So here you have the mechanism how waves of immense energy, we're talking about one Hiroshima bomb of energy being packed every meter of wavefront. I mean, this is very energetic. Can completely reshape the surface of the Earth for thousands of kilometers southward. And all this topography you see here is a result of these waves. They are meters deep in sand. You know, if they could export sand from here, they'd be rich if there was a market. You see a great difference between Bosnia, for example, and Greece, much further south. There you see more of the rock, bare rock. And the sand is more in the valleys, but you do see sand deposits perched at higher altitude. Here are some of the animals that went extinct at the end of the Ice Age. These are some websites of mine. This is my book, Earth Under Fire, where I describe this. This is my dissertation, PhD dissertation over here, which I put on CD and updated. It's more technical. This has a lot of myths about the flood and conflagration. I put the whole thing together as to how this event occurred at the end of the Ice Age. Here's a map, another map of the ice sheet looking down from the pole. Here's Alaska. You find a lot of animal carcasses preserved in the tundra here. Siberia. Here they find mammoths, mastodons, with just the bones because they're not preserved. This is North America. Here we are, European ice sheet. So Bosnia is somewhere here. This is from central Alaska. And one characteristic of these deposits is that the heavier material will be at the bottom and the lighter material further up. Like at the bottom you find gravel and even gold, because gold being heavier, that's where they find the gold, is at the bottom. And they do a lot of gold mining in Alaska. So as you go up, you find, for example, the skin of animals, carcasses that have not decayed, you'll find them more up here, whereas the bones, heavier things, you find down here. This is a picture from Siberia. You see the muck. This is frozen muck that melts in the spring. And you see the tusks there. This is an aerial shot of drumlin fields in North Saskatchewan, Canada. These, these are drumlins. These things shaped sort of like a chevron sign. They're hills that are about 20 to 30 meters in height, 400 to 600 meters in width, and about 1 to 4 kilometers long. And the geologist who was discussing this concluded that the waves had to be much higher than the height of those drumlins. So we're talking about at least 100 meter high waves traveling at enormous rates. And this is sediment. It piles up as it goes. For example, one drumlin field in central western New York State contains 10,000 drumlins. And these are most obvious when you're flying over an airplane. Here's scablands, eastern Washington. The canyon here carved by water flowing tremendous speeds. These waves greatly sped up the rate of transformation of the planet. So things that geologists would have assumed would take hundreds of thousands of years, maybe millions of years, can happen in a matter of thousands of years. Here's another shot of scablands in eastern Washington. They're very close to the ice sheet, where the ice sheet was. Here's the Columbia Gorge. This was full of water, traveling very high velocity towards the ocean. And Scablands is over the hill here in this direction, towards Washington. Here's a map, shows you, there's Mount Rainier. Here are the Scablands, Montana, Idaho. Here's the Columbia River. Here's the ice sheet. See how close? And then the Snake River here. And here's a shot of the Snake River Canyon in Idaho. And they find this in Nebraska. It's called Agate Springs Quarry. These are all bones of animals that are left in the deposits. Here's Grand Canyon, Arizona. Again, this would have been full of water from these waves. They travel a great distance. So things that you would expect take millions of years, a lot of this could have happened just in the last few ice ages. I did some study in Greece, a place called Megalopolis, which is right here in the Peloponnesus. And there's a basin that's surrounded with mountains. They mine lignite here. This plain actually is flood deposit. You had these huge waves extending down as far as Greece, and they would top over the mountains, stripping all the trees. Greece was loaded with evergreens in those days. It just pulverized them and dumped that along with the sediment here in this valley. This is one example. And today they're mining this. So you can think of this as the floods of Atlantis. The results are being burned for lignite. And here you see this dark area. This is lignite. And there's the power plant where they're burning it to generate electricity. I went there and I did close-up examination, took samples. I did some radiocarbon dating. I sent some samples for radiocarbon dating. They came up with a date of at least 45,000 years. The ones I sent. So this may be related to that very large event that we showed earlier. And you find other deposits through Greece. Here on this island of Evia, up here, Kozani, so on. You find these basins where they're mining the lignite. And always the lignite's covered with sediment above. See, these waves came and they're recurrent because after these lakes discharge, they still can melt and accumulate more meltwater, and then you might have another discharge event. So it's multiple waves. It's not just when you hear about one flood, but actually these were many floods, and they occurred throughout the Ice Age. Also, this whole area here, Larry says, is a big plain area. The way the geologists described it is there was a lake there, and it gradually drained through this gorge into the sea. Well, how would a lake form if there was a passage to the sea? So that's the problem. With this theory of the glacier wave, it explains that this is a lake where huge amounts of water came all at once, created the lake, and over periods of months it finally drained into the sea. I went on a trip up here west of Larissa, and you find sediments at very high altitude in the mountains, and you wonder how did they get there? The only way is to be transported by huge waves, just like here. And like earlier, I was talking about the lithic fragments. Heinrich found these Heinrich event horizons here in the North Atlantic. And here you can plot out the Heinrich events. They name them H0, H1, and so on. And they're dated here. This is a record that goes back 90,000 years. And here's the 40,000 year event. So you had Heinrich event 5 was associated with that, and then you had immediately as it was ending another Heinrich event. So these are indicating times of floods. If the pyramid was built here, you had many floods after that that would have covered it. See the Heinrich events 3, 2, 1, and 0. Heinrich event 0 was about 12,500 years ago. Actually, probably started around 12,700, which is a flood date that's recorded in the archaeoastronomy records. This is a blow-up of some of these Heinrich events, showing how they match the climate profile. This is cold temperatures, and then down this way is warmer temperatures. This is the end of the Ice Age. So here would be several events that could have caused, covered the pyramid. This graph I made by taking data from the rise of sea level, because at the end of the Ice Age, sea level was rising, and during the period when the ice was melting, this is right around 14,500 years ago, the rate at which the sea level rose really went way up. So you would expect a lot of flooding at this time. Also, this indicates the rate of glacial recession. So it matches, that's peak. And you had it subside a bit, and then it suddenly rose again. This is meltwater pulse B, and this occurred right at the end of the Ice Age, and in fact correlates with Plato's date of 11,600 years ago. Now, these flood events were very important to the ancients. They wanted to pass down the knowledge of this to us in the future, because when these events happen, destroy civilizations. So, recorded history, people are reduced to living in caves. The built pyramids had machinery. Iron rusts very easily. It would just become powder after some hundreds of years, and then just dissolve. You would have no trace of it. But in this case, it was partially preserved in the rock. So if they had iron machinery, this would help explain how these pyramids, how the tunnels were excavated. I believe that the tunnels could have been shelters to escape from the radiation. And in fact, these rooms could have held many people. In fact, it's a healing area. If they did have radiation damage, they go in the tunnels and they would have gotten help get healed. The fact it's a labyrinth. Maybe they even had tools in there that if the flood had closed off the entrance, they could dig their way out again. And even in the pyramid, we see evidence that the tunnels go under the pyramid from some work that's been done. So they could even have taken shelter inside the pyramid. In fact, all of Visoko, from what I learned, it is literally littered with tunnels. This tunnels that excavated is just the tip of the iceberg. These tunnels could have held perhaps perhaps 1 million people. So this could have had quite an extensive civilization, and it's just you don't see it because all under this sand. You might have to dig down 30 meters to find it. Here is the easiest place to uncover because the pyramid is so tall. It's the easiest artifact to uncover. And maybe a geologist can then get interested. I mean, this should be a place where you have thousands of geologists trying to uncover this because you can find a whole civilization here. And it stands to reason because the climate was more of an invigorating climate here during the ice age. Similar to northern Germany, Sweden. So one way they passed the information down was with the zodiac. The zodiac actually takes account of these catastrophic events due to polar precession. The polar precession they use as their clock. The vernal equinox, which is the observation of the place in the sky when the sun is rising in spring, that moves, takes about 26,000 years and moves through the whole zodiac. So it's like a giant clock. And we are now, they say, entering the age of Aquarius, the vernal equinox entering Aquarius. So we're over here today. But if you go, we're here, Aquarius, the actual Aquarius waterfall would be about 1,000 years from now. It will occur. But going back to the Pisces, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo. Now here, there's a myth connected with Virgo and Leo that says that humanity became depraved and went from the Golden Age to the Silver Age to the Bronze Age, finally to the Iron Age. And as humanity spiritually declined, the gods couldn't take being with them, they left one by one. Finally, Austria, which is named for Virgo, was the last to leave. And when Austria left, Zeus brought a flood to punish humanity. So if you interpret this, Virgo or Austria leaving would imply the vernal equinox now left Virgo. And this is where you've got the catastrophe. And if you look at the boundary between Leo and Virgo, it occurred 12,700 years ago. So here are the actual constellations, and you can calculate this with programs to plot back the position of the vernal equinox. And this important date is recorded in the Beth Alpha Synagogue mosaic. This mosaic they date from the 6th century Christ era. And you notice here they have the symbol for spring, spring equinox, and it's positioned right between Virgo and Leo. So this was not the case at that time, so why are they encoding this date? This was a very important date that they wanted to pass down. Here you have Theven in the sun chariot, or Apollo with the sun chariot, indicating reference to the sun. So a solar cataclysm appears to be referred to here. Also, you find the Dendera zodiac in Egypt proposes, a different date, which we'll mention in a minute. But here, looking at this period, around 12,700, 12,900 years ago, you see that you plot the death rate of mammals by taking their radiocarbon dates, converting them to calendar dates, and you plot how many of those did you find at each of those dates. And you find a lot of them were occurring right here, and they believe that this is the cutoff date, that these are really false dates, they're overly young, and that this is the real cutoff boundary, and nothing of the Pleistocene animals survived past that date. And that was around 12,900 years ago. And here you have a lot of flooding. This is a rate of meltwater discharge into the Gulf Gulf of Mexico from the oceans, from a ocean sediment core. So you see that this catastrophe had indication of a solar involvement, melting of the ice sheets. This period was had very high solar flare activity based on the rise of carbon-14 at that time. You also had a carbon-14 spike here. You had a geomagnetic flip, or a flip, but not a reversal here. So there was a lot going on at that time. And this shows, again, from the Cariaco Basin, the carbon-14 record. This is a magnification of what was going on. And you see these spurts periodically of radiocarbon, and they're separated by the solar cycle. So there's something like 3 22-year solar cycles between these two, and again another set of 3, about 66 years. And between these two, it's 198 years, so that's like 9 22-year solar cycles. And that is a very prominent cycle that they find when they look geologically at solar effects. That 198-year cycle is very prominent. And actually, the 2 largest carbon-14 surges occurred at those 2 dates. This one date is 12,887 years before 2000, so in other words, 12,900 years ago. And the other was closer to 12,700, which is the date recorded in the zodiac. And this shows that you've got a huge beryllium-10 spike at that time. This is from the tree ring record. You see it also in the tree ring record. It's huge rise of carbon-14. So, also in the Netherlands, they find this blackened horizon. They call it the Ucella horizon, which indicates some sort of conflagration occurring. We can date at least one of the zodiac constellation back to the Ice Age, the constellation of Taurus. They have a date going back 17,000 years. That comes from Lascaux, from a cave in Lascaux, France. They found this painting on the wall of Taurus. And the way they know this is not just a drawing of a bull, is that they painted the Pleiades here and the Hades star cluster here. And there was another set of stars here. So they know that these people were depicting the sky, the constellation in the sky. And this is mainstream science. You may be aware of this. And they did radiocarbon dating, and it came out to be about 16,500 years old. I'm not sure if that's the radiocarbon date or the calendar date, but definitely far back. So, at least one constellation we know goes way back, and it's a very important constellation. The bull symbolizes this charge of cosmic rays coming from the galactic center, which I call superwave. If you look at the Taurus, is charging along the ecliptic, and his horn, his horn is going right towards the galactic anticenter. I'll show you this in this next slide. If this is the galactic plane, here's the solar system here. This is the ecliptic. The ecliptic is at 60 degrees to the galactic equator plane. And so here we have Scorpius aligned towards in the direction of the galactic nucleus. And here's Taurus, the opposite. It's towards the anti-center, they call it, the direction away from the center. And Leo and Aquarius, Leo and Aquarius are at right angles. And in the zodiac, these are the fixed signs. They form the Sphinx. So the Sphinx is really encoding, it's calling our attention, thank you, to this important fact that the zodiac is talking about things happen in the galactic center. Now, going back, where did that go? Oh, I punched the button down here. But,
Going back big time.
Yeah.
do I have to go through all the slides? Oh, just one more. Okay. So, here's Orion. And it's as if Orion and Taurus are doing battle. Now notice Orion is pointing with his club towards the galactic ancestor. These are the way the constellations would appear about 16,000 years ago. And the myth, the story, the legends about this constellation, the Orion constellation, say that he represents the loss of life of humanity that occurred in a great catastrophe in the past. So he's sort of like a memorial in the sky to commemorate all the dead souls that sorrowfully passed away in this tragedy. And it occurred through this combat with the bull. In Egyptian mythology, they talk about the bull of heaven, that the Creator sent out the bull of heaven, or Hathor, who is a goddess of inundation, flood, sent out the bull of heaven to punish humanity. Unfortunately, there's this overtone that humanity was bad and needs to be punished, but really we have to get above all that and realize this is part of nature. You know, the galactic center is a creative center. It periodically explodes, emits matter. All the matter of the stars, matter that forms our planet, the sun, the stars, all came from the center of the galaxy. So if it weren't for this process, we wouldn't be here. But we have to realize it's part of nature and not to feel we did anything wrong. Interestingly, there's one myth says Orion died because he stepped on a scorpion. And there's another myth that says that Artemis, the goddess who they had an affair together, and Apollo became jealous. And when Orion was being chased by the scorpion, in the great distance, he was very far away, Apollo says to Artemis, this fellow, he didn't say his name, he said it was somebody else that had raped a woman, he's a bad man, you should kill him. Artemis was a hunter, and so she shot him with an arrow, and he died. So we have two myths. In one case, he was killed by an arrow, another by a scorpion. And interestingly, if you look at the zodiac, here we have Scorpio, and here's Sagittarius, the archer. And if you look, these are the only two arrows, the stinger and the archer's arrow. Only two arrows in the zodiac. And if you put them the way they appear in the sky, you have to reverse the Scorpio sign this way and put it on the right. So this is the way it would appear if you're looking at the sky. And you see they're pointing at something. So what they're pointing at is the galactic center, Sagittarius space star. This is an X-ray picture. And that's where the mother star is located. Astronomers call it black hole. I don't believe in black holes. You can easily disprove black holes, but unfortunately astronomy today has become like a religion. Latch on to the concept, and even if there's evidence against it, they continue. Very simple proof, I don't have time to explain, which would convince you that this is indeed a star, not a black hole. It's about, I estimate, about 25 times larger in diameter than the sun, and it's putting out the sun, and it's putting out hundreds of millions of times more radiation than the sun. And at times it explodes, and the amount of energy goes up 100,000 million times. And that's what produces what I call superwave, this cosmic ray volley, a wave of cosmic rays that shoots through the galaxy at the speed of light. And the ancients left a message for us to indicate this past event. This is the constellation of Sagittarius, and here's Scorpius, and right now, there's a myth that says that Sagittarius was taking aim at the heart of the scorpion. So if you look today, here's the arrow, you'll see that the trajectory misses the heart. Here's the heart. It's Antares, a big red giant star, very bright. And so you have to regress back because this star is moving over time. So you say, where was it in the past when it aligned, this trajectory of the arrow aligned with the heart, and you come up with a date 15,860 years ago. And also the other thing is this, here you have the constellation of Sagitta, the arrow, which it's not written, but you can conclude this is the arrow that Sagittarius shot. But now it flew out along the galactic equator from the galactic center. And this represents the cosmic ray volley that moved out. By the way, the tip of the arrow is exactly 1 radian from the center. So if you take a radius, you take the radius of the circle, and you mark off along the circumference, that's where 1 radian is. So when you are referring to this point, what did you do? The battery? Okay. It's a switch here. I probably mistakenly hit the switch. So this tip, by being so close to 1 radian, it's in effect referring to the galactic center, and that this distance is a distance from the galactic center to Earth. So symbolically, it's telling us that these cosmic rays do reach us very quickly, and that we should be concerned about this. And now astronomers have no idea of this threat. This has not entered mainstream science yet. This is my book, Decoding the Message of the Pulsars, where I talk about messages that are being sent to us from across the galaxy. As far as I know, it's the first discovery of extraterrestrial communication being received. My interpretation is that pulsars are not natural objects, they are beacons, and there's something like over 2,000 pulsars they found scattered throughout the galaxy. And certain of these are referring to this event that happened at the end of the Ice Age. They're trying to call our attention to it. And for example, they put the second fastest pulsar right here at the 1 radian point. Now that can't be by chance. And this has so many unusual characteristics. It's as if it's a beacon that stands out from all of the pulsars, and they put it right there. And here, and that's the second fastest pulsar. The third fastest pulsar is only some degrees away, and it deviates, the pulsation rate deviates from the other by only 3%. That's incredibly, it can't be just coincidence, you know. You can calculate the coincidences of these things, like the sighting. I calculated the sighting of this pulsar at that particular point, and it's like 10 to the 23rd, something, or a huge number like that. And one chance in 10 to the 23rd, it could have been due to chance. The other thing is that there's ratios that show between this distance here and the longitude distance between this and this indicates pi, two very significant figures. Then there's alignments here. This aligns with gamma Sagitta, which is the point of the arrow. So it's almost like they knew the location of the arrow in our zodiac, or this is not part of the zodiac, but it's part of the message of the zodiac, and are trying to call our attention to it, which makes you wonder about visitation, and maybe they taught us the constellation lore. And this is a description of galactic superwave, cosmic rays moving out as a wave. And so if we are here, thank you.
That's a
here's the core.
That's like too bright.
And so this wave would travel out as a spherical wave of cosmic rays. And as it goes out, I found evidence that it was detonating supernova explosions on the way. If you look at the closer supernova here, Vela pulse, the Vela supernova remnant, located right there. And the Crab supernova remnant is the second closest to us of the young supernova remnants. And if you look at the dates that they exploded, they occurred at the time this superwave came by. This superwave was dating around 14,000 years ago when it came through this area. But it was lasting for several thousands of years. So this whole period was a period of excess cosmic ray radiation. And right now, the Crab Nebula is right in the middle of this barrage of cosmic rays, and that's why it's the most luminous supernova remnant in the sky, and is doing all sorts of unusual things that astronomers are mystified about. It's shooting out gamma rays, very high energy, that it can't even be produced by the pulsar. You can show that the pulsar most likely is, that's the other thing, both of these are marked by pulsars, and they're among the most unusual pulsars in the sky, along with the millisecond pulsar that we just mentioned. So it's like they're trying to call our attention to this, and actually this is how I got the idea for the superwave, because in the beginning all I had done is decipher the zodiac arrow date, and I knew that the zodiac symbology, I had also discovered that it's describing a new physics of creation in ether physics, which is different from standard science. That the point where Sagittarius and Scorpius are is right at the point in the description of this physics of creation where matter and energy are just beginning to emerge. So given the date it was recording, and this idea of the emergence of matter and energy, that's how I concluded there was a core explosion at the center on that date. But I hadn't at that point concluded that that stuff actually reaches us at the speed of light. It was this that showed me that, because the only way that they could have had this relation, because it's this, from this point to this point, it could only have detonated on this date if the wave traveled at the speed of light. So all of those things together, archaeoastronomy, extraterrestrial communication, together caused me to form the theory. Of course, that's not something you mentioned in the science publication, so I put that in my book. Let me go to the next slide. This is a record of the ice core record. These are beryllium 10 spikes. Beryllium 10 is produced by cosmic rays. 10 minutes? Okay. Here's that 40,000 year event. Notice how big it is. Here's the one at the end of the Ice Age. So this one, about 41,000 years ago, was huge compared to that. And you see how it dips here? This is where you had the geomagnetic reversal and the very large solar activity. Solar activity tends to shield cosmic rays. So that's why cosmic ray exposure to the Earth went down at that time. But solar cosmic ray exposure went up. So this gives you an idea what was happening. If you adjust for the screening effect, this would have been way up here probably. Maybe 3 or 4 times as high as this one. But you see that we've had this going all the way back. This is the last ice age. This shows you climate, temperature. So here was the ending of the warming of the ice age. Here was the onset. Here this was semi-glaciated state from about 115,000, 110,000 years ago to about 70,000 semi-glaciated. Then you went to full glaciation. And at all these climatic boundaries, we had these pulses of cosmic rays, super waves, basically. Here was a very large one that ended the previous glaciation, most likely due to solar activity. And if you look at this Heinrich event diagram again, the zodiac arrow date, that 15,800 year ago date, coincides with Heinrich event 1. And also you had a big acidity spike in the Antarctic ice core at that time. It lasted for 100 years. So something definitely was going on in that date. And this superwave would have brought cosmic dust into the solar system and done all sorts of unusual things to climate, completely changed the climate. It would have aggravated the sun. This dust would have surrounded the sun. And, when dust falls on the surface of the sun, it energizes it. The sun would turn into what's called a T-Tauri star. We see these out there. They're surrounded by dust, and they're very active. They're flaring. They're generating. Their chromospheres are expanded. And I want to mention a date for the Sphinx. If you look at the zodiac, the brightest star on the ecliptic is Regulus. And it's one of the 4 guardian stars, the brightest. And it's like a marker. It's right at the breast of the Sphinx. And traditionally, the Egyptians believed that the sun rose through the breast of the Sphinx, that the breast of the Sphinx was a portal to the underworld, or Osiris' underworld, the realm of darkness, whereas the sun rising there would symbolize the sun coming from the darkness into the day world. And so if you take that symbology and put it here for the vernal equinox moving, as it moves, it's as if the Regulus was a marker indicating the emergence of the Earth's climate from the Ice Age to the more moderate climate of the present interglacial. It was trying to celebrate that. And so I believe that that's what the Sphinx was, the purpose of the Sphinx was to mark that. And that may have been a date for the construction of the Sphinx. And that date, it comes out to be 9,000 BC, 11,600 years ago. And at that time, cosmic ray intensity was quite low. Before and after this 200 or 300 year period, cosmic ray activity was quite high. It was very high here, it was very high here. Here's the ending of the Ice Age. You had huge amounts of flooding during this period, so it would have been difficult to come out and do a big construction project at that time. This is a solar cycle, sunspot number map, a chart going back, and you see on this date, 9,000 BC, sunspot number was quite low, so solar activity would have been low at that time. So it's logical that the Sphinx could have been built at that time, carved. Also, Roger Cunningham claims that there's a map inside air shaft, where Gatlinburg's door is a star map above the door. And he says that the constellations it shows are as they would appear 11,200 years ago. And he's suggesting that that might have been the date of the building of the Great Pyramid. So it matches with this date. So this could be a date for the pyramid. And I also already mentioned about this, that the pyramid, the Bosnian Pyramid, could have been used as a cosmic ray shelter, and as well as the other pyramids around the world, the ones in Croatia, and so on. You had, after, it was a small cosmic ray event, small super ray, about 5,300 years ago, around the time of the beginning of the Mayan calendar. And notice that after that you had the rise of Egyptian civilization, now Delta civilization. So it's as if things cooled down and civilization could start up at that point. But we've had some small superwave events since then. There have been about 13 of them. The last one occurred 700 years ago in the horse and buggy days. So if an event like that happened today, though, it could bring us back to horse and buggies, because it could take down the electric grid, could take down the satellites, just like a coronal mass ejection. So these are things, we're overdue for another event. So these are things that could happen in the near future. And here are dates that I predicted that these happened on based on astronomical observations of neon bubbles that are expanding from the galactic center. And they match up with what you see in the ice core record. At least 8 of the 13 I have matches for, where they find rising of carbon-14 or beryllium-10. And this is the G2 cloud trajectory. It's about now, we're very close to the galactic core, and we're waiting to see if something will happen. I have news postings on my website, etheric.com, about this. So the question is, if there's a binary star there that might get sucked in, or a planet. My guess is that the planets and binary stars would have enough momentum to carry them away, so it shouldn't be a problem. It's only the small stuff, like maybe comet-sized objects or smaller, they could fall in and could energize the core. I would have liked to talk about the advanced science encoded, like the Virgo constellation. I'll just do this. Virgo, she's pointing at, with her one hand at the center of the Virgo supercluster, which is the most concentrated bunch of galaxies in the sky, and it's also the closest supercluster, the Virgo supercluster. This whole thing here is the Virgo supercluster, and this is the Virgo cluster, which she's pointing to. With her other hand, she's showing the direction of the Virgo supercluster equator. So how would they have knowledge of this? There's actually a myth about Virgo that she is seeding the stars of the sky, that she carries a shaft of wheat, and the wheat grains she scatters, and those become stars. So, in a way, while she's talking about the creation of stars in the sky, she's also talking about creation of galaxies. So this is one step higher of knowledge, because they would have had to know those were galaxies there and not stars. They would have had to have telescopes as big as Mount Palomar or some of the large telescopes we have. They would have had to know about the redshift, spectral, had to do spectral measurements to know that those weren't stars. They would have had to see the spiral characters of the galaxies. So this indicates very high level of technology. And they also code in the zodiac the 3-degree Kelvin background anisotropy, where it's hotter in one part of the sky and colder in the other. This requires use of helium-cooled detectors, spacecraft to get them up in the sky above the atmosphere, because you can't see this below the atmosphere. So it requires space travel, basically computers, immense computation. Whoever designed the Zodiac was as far ahead as we are, at least. And it's very possible it came from off-planet. There's teachings from civilization concerned with our survival. There's more, but do you want me to go on?
Yeah. Yes.
5 more minutes? Oh, okay. So the Zodiac was designed as a cryptogram. The Sphinx was one of the keys to decipher the cryptogram, which is why they talk about the riddle of the Sphinx. The truth is, the riddle is, solve my cryptogram. And the cryptogram, if you solve it, you realize about the galactic core explosion phenomenon and the idea of the physics of creation. And one of the other keys is the tarot. So they say that astrology and the tarot are the gold and silver keys of occult knowledge. So really, they're talking about cryptogram. The tarot puts the physics principles, they're encoding principles of an ether physics, and they describe in quite detail how to construct this physics. And I was working not from the tarot, but from systems theory and from chemistry, chemical wave phenomena. That's how I developed the physics. And it was after I developed the physics, I realized that they had this in the past. They were trying to pass this down to us. So we were sort of rediscovering the physics that they had. They say that the initiates in ancient Egypt wanted to become indoctrinated into these mysteries, that they had to enter the breast of the Sphinx blindfolded and pass through tests. You're probably aware of these stories. And then they were led to a chamber where they saw the frescoes on the wall, which from documents left contributed to Iamblichus, which were perhaps written 500 AD. We're not sure of the origin, but it came through some manuscripts from France, actually. I think they surfaced there, and probably preserved by some Masonic lodges in the past. And with the tarot, we see these principles in the right order, and by matching up the zodiac signs to get the same concepts, because you can see the same concepts in the zodiac, but they're scattered, they're in a different order. And so it's sort of like the gene in creating chromosomal reproduction. You have the code in the gene, you have to put the proteins in the right order to get reproduction of the idea of the code. And when you do that, the zodiac gives you an indication you correctly decoded it. It's sort of like the safe, opening the safe. You have to go first one way around and then the other way around, sort of like the Stargate movie. Actually, the idea came from my manuscript. It was circulated in Hollywood at that time. But when you finally get the right order, you find a new order, the polarities line up in the same order, plus minus, and the qualities have a new pattern, which again is ordered. And there's very few combinations that will give that. So that's sort of like the feedback that you correctly decoded it. And you find that Weather passes down as incredibly advanced physics. I described in these books. And this is a video of, this is the ether reaction model they're talking about, called Model G.
Double click. Double click.
Double click on this, right here. Not going. I'll go to the next one. The next one's more interesting. But this is animated. This shows the way this is an actual open system. These are transmutations, sort of like Keely's idea that there's more than one ether. There's many different types of ether, and they're reacting just like there are biochemical reactions in our body, the reactions, the diffusions, very close to the Star Wars idea of the Force, that space takes account of itself, the White Indian idea that space is bound together as an organic whole. I'll go to the next one. Oops. What did I do? I pushed the right button. Yeah. So here's a video, we can get it showing us a computer simulation of those reactions. And they produce a wave pattern which represents a nucleon emerging out of the 0 point. And this is what they were talking about. It's the emergence of the primordial wave that gave the particle of matter. And if you can explain the creation of one particle of matter, that explains everything, because you solve the mystery of creation. You just do it over and over. You don't need a Big Bang for this. Space is not expanding, stationary. Matter comes into being spontaneously through continuous creation. And that creation is going on most rapidly in the centers of galaxies.
Not opening.
We're just about done here. And it's encoded in all the major ancient creation myths, like the myth of Atum, the story of Osiris, the story of Zeus, Babylonian creation epic. They're all symbolic representations of this creation science. That's, for them to understand this, they would have had to have computers to do the simulation, which I unfortunately wasn't able to show you. But indeed, it blows your mind when you really get into these things with the knowledge of these new developments in science. Thank you very much. Sorry.